and George and Elaine. And when you're reading The Grumpy Accountant, you're reading a novel, really. It reads like a novel. The main point is that this book is not your typical book about tax. 28 million Canadians file tax returns every year. That number should be closer to maybe 2 million. So we should free 26 million approximately Canadians from having any obligation to file a tax return. Right now, Canadians are spending approximately $7 billion a year to get their tax returns filed. And that's whether they have to hire an accountant or they have to purchase tax software to file online. That's $7 billion that Canadian households spend. That doesn't include corporations and small businesses and the money that they spend to file their tax returns. And that also doesn't include the CRA's budget, which is almost $5 billion every year. I don't like my job anymore. And it's not that I don't like it. I enjoy talking to people and dealing with people and talking to my clients. But what I don't enjoy is knowing the fact that my job should not exist. If we were designing a tax system from scratch, let's say Canada never had an income tax for some reason, and today in 2020, all of a sudden we need an income tax, there's no way we would design our system the way it is right now. When the income tax was first established in 1917, it was a piece of legislation that was only 11 pages long. It was 11 pages, and the average person could read it in 20 minutes. Today, the Income Tax Act is over 3,000 pages. It contains over 1 million words, and nobody understands it. So what I don't like about my job is that because the tax system is so complicated, I have a job doing this. But really, my job should not be necessary. My job is not really adding value to society. It's really the opposite. It's taking away value because people need to pay me to help them comply with a piece of legislation that is just way too complicated. And I kind of wish I would have a job that's actually necessary for society. People like doctors and engineers and plumbers and electricians, these are real jobs that we need these jobs. And if civilization ended and there was some sort of zombie apocalypse, like in The Walking Dead, no one would care to keep me alive. Oh, he can file Canadian tax returns. We really need this guy. But if I was a plumber or an electrician, or if I knew how to do gardening or farming, like those are real jobs that people actually need for society to survive. But tax accounting, filing tax returns, is not a job that shouldn't really exist when you really think about it. I think the Canadian tax system is ripe for disruption. We haven't had a full comprehensive review of the Canadian tax system in over 50 years. The last time we did a big review of the tax system was in the 1960s. The Carter Commission released their report in 1967. But since then, no government has been courageous enough to undergo a full review of the system. And the world has changed a lot since 1967, and we need to adapt and change our tax system to reflect that. In Europe and other parts of the world, they have tax systems that are much simpler, at least for the majority of individual taxpayers. And I would love to somehow show that and demonstrate that. And I do that a little bit in the book, in The Grumpy Accountant, where I show what a simpler tax system could look like based off of models that already exist. We don't have to do anything so radically different or radically new. We have to study the best practices of some of these other countries. And if we could go over there, we could do studies and reviews of their tax systems and find the best practices in all these countries, and we bring those ideas over. I wrote The Grumpy Accountant because every night I would lay awake in bed, unable to fall asleep, because I realized what I'm doing with my time right now as an accountant is only helping a couple hundred people every year. And although it feels good that I'm helping these people, I really wish there was a way that I could help many more people, not just my clients. And I thought that by writing The Grumpy Accountant, I would be able to help not only a couple hundred people, but maybe a couple 100,000 people who might read this book and find the tax tips to be very informative. And hopefully those people would spread the word even further, and millions of Canadians would be reached and inspired by the message of the book. which is to call for a massive simplification of our tax system. And if we did that, that would help so many people. It would help families not have to be stressed out and worried about their tax returns every year. It would help senior citizens who are trying to enjoy their golden years enjoy their retirements more and not have to worry about keeping receipts and filing their tax returns and waiting for their tax refunds. It would help people who are self-employed or own a small business not have to deal with an extremely complicated bureaucracy and an overly complicated tax system. If my dream came true and the tax system was massively simplified, just imagine not having to file a tax return every year, not having to keep these receipts, not having to download tax software and keep up with every new tax credit and deduction. Imagine if you're self-employed or you own a small business, imagine not having to pay your accountant a couple $1,000s a year and not having to keep every single receipt for every single expense and having perfect clean bookkeeping. And imagine not having to worry about HST audits and payroll audits and just having such an easier time in your life because this horrible, stressful burden that's on everyone's shoulders, they have to constantly be worrying about and not looking forward to tax time every year. Imagine if that just disappeared and you'd be able to live your life, enjoy more time with your family, even if it seems so impossible, and even if everyone thinks it's unrealistic and it will never happen. But I want people to remember that even if everyone says something can't happen, it doesn't mean that's true. It could happen, and you just have to advocate for it, push for it, and not give up. If I had it my way, millions of Canadians would not even need an accountant or even have to file a tax return. But there was only so much I could say about this in this short documentary. To learn more, read The Grumpy Accountant. You could buy your copy on Amazon.ca. The ebook and audiobook are also available everywhere. To learn more, or if you want to contact me, visit grumpyaccountant.ca.
Welcome, everybody. I see people are still joining, and we have a great turnout. For those of you who don't know me, you might have got some emails from me. I'm Tabitha, and I'm from Life to Paper Publishing, and I'm helping Neil in efforts to help the Grumpy Accountant and its amazing message with Canadians. And we're really happy to be here tonight because it gives Neil a chance to talk about the book and what inspired him to write the book and allow everybody to ask some questions, because by now I hope that you all have had a chance to read it. And with that being said, you might have seen
Share is starting.
I'm going to turn it over to Neil. He's going to tell you a bit, introduce himself and about the book and what it's about.
Yes.
Dad, everyone can hear you. Mute yourself.
Neil, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming, and I think more people are coming in. There's a lot of pressure here, like my whole family's here. So anyways, yeah, The Grumpy Accountant. You've all been forced to deal with my shameless self-promotion over the last few months, so I apologize to everyone for that. But as you all know, The Grumpy Accountant is a labor of love that I have labored over the past number of months. My wife is here too, Allison Lieberman, who has a look on her face which indicates that, you know, this book was a lot of work. And I actually started writing it right when our daughter was born. I started to really get serious about writing the book. So it wasn't the best timing from the perspective of like new first-time parents for me to be spending a lot of time writing the book when perhaps I should have been, doing other household duties. but the book had to be written. I could no longer remain silent in the face of such grave injustice and such.
Neil, you're muted. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, so the book had to be written. I wrote it because I really strongly felt that I could no longer remain silent at what I strongly feel is an overly complicated, unnecessary bureaucracy that every single one of us, every single Canadian in this country has to deal with. And I realized over the years working as an accountant, like, you know, most of what I'm doing in terms of filing tax returns, and most of what we do to get our tax returns filed, if you think about it, keeping receipts on file for 6 years, and having to hire a professional to do our tax returns for us, or pay to download the software, and spend hours and hours trying to figure out how to properly complete our tax returns. And then we have to wait for our tax refunds. And then we receive letters from the CRA asking us to see receipts. And then we have to send in the receipts to the CRA. And the CRA has to hire over 40,000 people to make sure that we're filing our tax returns properly. And the CRA's budget is $5 billion a year. And Canadians spend $7 billion a year paying people like me, thank you very much, to file your tax returns. I realize all of this should not be necessary. And if you really think about it, imagine every other bill that you pay. So for example, you pay your rent every month or your mortgage every month. You pay your car insurance. You pay your car lease or your car payment. You pay for gas. You pay your energy bills in your house. You pay your phone bill, your internet bill. Every single one of these bills, how does it work? The company sends you a bill and it shows the amount owing. The bill's usually one page, you can understand it, and you pay the bill, and that's it. So why is our tax bill so different? If you think about it conceptually on a philosophical level, why is it that our tax bill is the most complicated bill? It's not just a one-page thing that the government sends us. No, we have to calculate it ourselves. When I print a tax return to a PDF for my clients, it's anywhere between 30 and like 80 pages. It's insane. We have to calculate the bill, and then you pay the CRA or you get your refund. And then for the next 10 years, this is not an exaggeration, you can go back and adjust your bills from the past 10 years. And if you make a mistake on your bill, the CRA will correct it and they'll send you a reassessed bill, and then you have to hire a bill filing professional. Imagine if we did this with any other bill. Imagine if your company, imagine Rogers, Bell, or TELUS, you have your internet bill with Rogers. If Rogers did this, they would lose every single one of their customers, right? Nobody would put up with this. But with the government, we kind of just accept it and we just assume this is how it is. And there's no other way to run a tax system. And that's why I really want to push back against that. And that's why I wrote this book, to get this idea out there that we should be looking at a way to massively simplify the tax system on a grand scale, so that when you stop the average Canadian in the street and you ask them, how much tax did you pay last year? They'll actually be able to answer you. Because right now, if you ask every single person in this Zoom event tonight, if you ask any single one of us, how much is your internet bill every month? How much is your phone bill every month? How much is your rent or your mortgage payment? I guarantee you every single one of us will be able to answer that question. Now imagine someone comes up to you and says, how much tax did you pay last year? Okay. I bet you none of you probably know the answer to that question. Now, a lot of you will say, what do you mean? I didn't pay tax. I got a big refund. No, you still paid tax. You just paid more than you had to throughout the year. So you got a little bit of it back. But if you look at your tax return on line 43500, you'll see taxes payable. That's how much tax you actually paid. Now you're going to say, how do I even look up? I don't even know where line 43500 is on my tax return. Most people don't. So my point is that regardless of how much tax people pay, whether we're paying too much tax, too little tax, our Canadian tax rate's too high, too low, that's a whole other question. That's not what my book is about. My book is about The Grumpy Accountant is about simplicity versus complexity. I want simplicity. I want to simplify the whole thing such that I would have to find a new job. I would have to find something else to do that actually adds value to society. Maybe I'll become a dietitian like my wife, maybe because that actually helps people. Maybe I'll be a plumber or an electrician. These people always have work. In Ontario, there's a shortage of contractors right now. You try and find a contractor to come to your house, it's going to take weeks or months. So the idea that we have thousands of people like me who earn a living by filing tax returns for people, it's pretty absurd. Other countries have done away with this type of insane complexity. And that's really what the Grumpy Accountant is all about.
We've only have 38 people on.
Actually, you can't hear him. Louise, his fiance's name. Okay, guys, here we go.
Yeah.
I'm just muting everybody.
Okay.
Neil, I have a question for you, because I mean, you seem like a nice guy, but your book's called The Grumpy Accountant. So what's with the grumpy thing? Like, how did that come to be?
Well, so my parents are actually joining us tonight, and I actually, the credit for the title of the book actually goes to my mom, because we were once at a family dinner, and like I do at any family gathering or really any social gathering, I started to complain about everything I felt was wrong with society. I think the specific topic I was complaining about was how university, it seems like for a lot of people, they go to university for 4 years and then they can't find jobs, or they find a job that has nothing to do with what they did in school, or the 4 years they spent in university didn't prepare them for their job. That's what happened to me. The first day I got to work in an accounting firm after 4 years of studying accounting university, the partner hands me some work to do. He gives me these files, do this, do that. I didn't know how to do anything. And he asked me, well, what did you just do for 4 years in university? So I don't know, but I don't know how to do a tax return. So I was complaining about that. And my mother stopped me. She interrupted and she said, Neil, you sound like a grumpy old man. And I thought that that's such a good phrase. And I actually went home and I looked up the website, grumpyoldman.com, to see if I could purchase that domain name. And it was available, grumpyoldman.com. I didn't buy it, but the word grumpy really stuck with me. And I knew I would put that word to good use. So I credit my mom with the grumpiness. In real life, I don't know if I'm really grumpy all the time. I'm grumpy in tax season. And like, unfortunately, my wife has to deal with that. And I try very hard to be as least grumpy as possible. But it's the nature of my work, dealing with CRA every day, seeing what my clients go through. And we're not talking about like rich, millionaires and billionaires that, yeah, okay, those people would have complicated tax returns. That makes sense. I'm talking about normal human beings, people with modest incomes or even no income, and yet still have complicated tax filings, complicated bureaucracy they have to deal with. And it causes a lot of grumpiness. And I think the question is, how could any tax accountant not be grumpy? That's really a question. If you find an accountant that's not grumpy, I would like to meet that person and talk to them.
Amazing. Thank you. I think you prepared to read a little bit from the book, right?
Yes, I prepared. So also, by the way, everyone, we'll leave time for questions and answers so people can ask me anything they want. I'll just briefly read from 2 different parts of the first chapter, which I think is
I want to say, sorry to interrupt, for those who are listening, pay attention. Even if you have read the book, pay extra attention, because we're going to do, and stick around if you can, because at the end we're going to ask a question that pertains to what he's read, and we're going to do a giveaway. So if you paid attention, we're going to ask a trivia question relating to what he's read. The first person to answer in the chat will get the prize.
Okay, so I'm going to read. This is from chapter 1, which is entitled, Why is My Paycheck So Low? So I'm starting in the middle. Jerry went home and prepared to go out to a friend's birthday party. At the party, Jerry regaled his friends with stories from his first 2 weeks of work. He explained what happened with the paycheck and pay stub, and suddenly became very sad and gloomy. One of the young women there, who Jerry had never seen before, approached Jerry and introduced herself. I have to tell you something. Back where I come from, across the pond in England, I never had to file a tax return. When I moved here to Canada, I thought it was so bizarre that almost everyone has to file a tax return. I felt completely lost, so I asked around and I found a really good accountant. Perhaps you should meet with him and he could teach you everything you need to know. Jerry was thankful for this advice. Thanks, that sounds great. My name's Jerry, by the way. And you are? Elaine, she replied. Okay, now I'm going to read from the end of the chapter where Jerry goes to meet his accountant, George, and he's in the accountant's office. And this is the end of chapter 1. George, you know what? I wouldn't even know where to begin if I tried filing my own tax return. Even though I would save a bit of money each year if I filed for myself, I feel like it would take me forever to figure out this stuff all alone. I will gladly pay your fee. Thanks so much for meeting with me today. I just sort of feel a little better. As Jerry was leaving the office, he took one last look at that First World War poster. George saw that Jerry was staring at the poster, trying to understand what it was doing there. Jerry, believe it or not, I am not a war buff. That poster is there to remind me of the history of the income tax in Canada. From 1867 to 1917, there was no federal income tax. In 1917, the government was running out of money due to the expenses of the First World War, which was raging on at that time. They introduced the Income War Measures Act to help fund the war effort. The legislation was only 11 pages long, could be read in 20 minutes, and only forced the top 2% of income earners to pay income tax and file a tax return. The income tax was supposed to be a temporary measure to pay off the debts from the war. Of course, we still have an income tax today over 100 years later. Except today, the Income Tax Act is over 3,000 pages, contains over 1 million words, and forces almost every Canadian to file a tax return. Every day I look at the poster, and it reminds me of my dream to simplify the tax system and reduce the Income Tax Act from 3,000 pages back to the original 11. Jerry was fascinated by this piece of history. He thanked George for his time and was very thankful that Elaine made the introduction. He knew he had to call Elaine and ask her for the opportunity to thank her in person over dinner. But he was so exhausted from the meeting, when he arrived home, he went straight to bed. He did not sleep well that night, but he did feel relieved a professional tax filer was going to be on his side.
Amazing. Thank you. So I guess we'll open it up to questions now. For those of you who would like to ask a question, there's a function where you can raise your hand. If it's easier for you, you can also just type in the chat saying you have a question, and we can call on you and you can jump in. Give you a second to figure out how that works. If not, I have some interesting questions for you too. Pat
Okay.
B has a question.
Hi there.
Just have to.
I know, I think you said, I don't know if it was in your introduction in the book that, or somewhere, I can't remember where, that you said that New Zealand had simplified its tax system. Firstly, would you say that New Zealand is comparable in terms of the size of its economy to Canada? And secondly, how did they do it, and how could you get government officials to get on your side and think the way you think, and politicians on board? Because
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. I don't think tax reform is a very sexy or important subject when people are, especially now, wondering how they're going to pay bills and earn money.
Right. Okay, so there's a few things. First of all, New Zealand created a separate ministry in their government for a ministry of tax. I don't know if they call it tax reform or tax simplification, but they did a comprehensive review of their whole system. And it's not just New Zealand, but a lot of European countries have simpler systems. And when I say simpler, I mean in terms of, let's say you're an employee, you get a T4 slip. In some of these countries, the employee has no tax return filing obligation because the T4 basically is the tax return. That's it. So that's what they do in England. And there's a whole bunch of countries that have a system like that. So what I want to do is somehow convince Canadian politicians that what they need to do is a comprehensive study, and this could take 5 or 10 years. They declare a royal commission, and this is what happened. This happened in the 1960s. They had a royal commission. It was called the Carter Commission, and they released a report in 1967, and they did a comprehensive review of the tax system. It took 5 years, and they released a whole set of recommendations. For example, one of the recommendations was actually that a family should file one tax return as a family unit and pay taxes payable based on family income. The government did not listen to them because that would be too costly to the government. So today we still file two individual, a husband and wife have to file 2 tax returns, even though they're a family unit. But when the government pays out Canada child benefits, they do it based on family income. So it's double dipping. So really the government admits that family income is an indicator of your ability to pay or what your budget should be. So when the government has to pay you money, they use family income. When you owe them money, it's individual income. But anyways, what the government needs to do is a comprehensive review of the entire system. This was done over 50 years ago. We need to do it today. Now, the current government, CPA Canada, which is the professional organization for accountants, has been actually trying to lobby on this issue. And obviously during COVID and until this is over, nothing's going to change. If anything, everything's become a lot more complicated because of all of the new benefits and programs that the government has implemented, like CERB and the new replacement CERBs, and for businesses, SEBA and CERS and SUS and all these crazy programs that are really driving everyone insane because the government releases the program and 5 days later they change the rules. 5 days later they change it again, and then they change it again, and nobody can keep up. So right now it's even more complicated. But the current government, this issue isn't really on their radar. If there was a change in government, it's possible that a different party might take a different approach. In the 2019 federal election, both the Conservative Party and the Green Party had it explicitly in their platform to do a comprehensive review of the entire Canadian tax system. Now, the different parties have different kind of reasons why they want to review it, but at least it's on the radar of some of these parties. So whether or not my dreams will actually come true, I don't know. But most people, most accountants, CPA Canada is trying very hard to lobby the government on this issue to make the tax system simpler and to do a comprehensive review. So I don't know what will happen, but other countries have done it. And we don't need to look south of the border to the US, which also has a very complicated tax system. Although some aspects of their system are simpler, some are more complicated. But a lot of European countries and other places have much simpler systems, and that's where we need to look.
We have a question. Dan, did you want to jump in and ask? Or I can just read it. He asks, can you comment on the government's plan to stop requiring employees to file a tax return?
I'm not sure what that's referring to. I wonder if that's referring to auto filing, like certain people with income below a certain level in simple tax situations. The government announced in September in the throne speech, they threw in one line about automated tax filing, which is really interesting. And I actually think about this issue a lot. I know that Pat in her question said the issue of tax reform is not a sexy issue. For me, it is. I get very worked up by it, and I actually lose sleep every night thinking about these issues. So the government created a plan that they're going to look into automated tax filing, because right now what's happening, Canada Child Benefits, GST credits, and other benefits that people are entitled to, it's estimated that Canadians are missing out on $1 billion. I feel like I'm like Dr. Evil from Austin Powers. $1 billion of benefits that Canadians are entitled to that they're not receiving because they're not filing tax returns. They don't know that they can in fact receive these benefits. So automated tax filing would be for those people who are entitled to these benefits but might not even know about them. There's a lot of Indigenous Canadians that they could file and receive a lot of these benefits, but they're just not, they don't know how to file. It's too complicated. So they might move to automated tax filing for certain people. Now, some critics of that plan say, well, do you really trust the government or the CRA to do that properly? After all, their goal is to give out as little money as possible and make sure you're paying as much as possible. So do we really trust them to do it right? The CRA makes mistakes all the time. Everyone makes mistakes. That's normal. So I have mixed feelings about it, honestly, but it's a step in the right direction that the government's kind of thinking about, generally speaking, this issue of, okay, how can we make the system simpler for as many people as possible?
Okay. Do we have any more questions? I had a question on Facebook Live, and that was about, are we going to have to pay taxes on the CERBs at the end of the year and the CRB?
Yeah, all of those are taxable income. So CERB, people who received, like if you receive $14,000 of CERB throughout 2020, the government will send you a T4A slip with that amount, and you have to report it in your tax return. Now, if you have zero other income, you're not going to owe really a lot of tax on it. You might not owe anything because the first $13,000 of income is tax-free. But if you have other income from other times during the year, or for example, you were entitled to earn up to $1,000 a month while receiving CERB, so that would be added to your other income, and you might have a tax bill. Now, the new benefits that started to replace CERB, they're deducting 10% tax at source. So if you're entitled to $500 every 2 weeks, you're getting $450, and they're considering $50 as income tax already deducted. But for a lot of people, that might not be enough. If you're in a higher bracket, that still might not be enough tax deducted. So you have to set aside some tax, to save for some tax just in case.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? I have a few.
Peter Oakes wrote a question. Yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I agree with what you're saying, and there should be a push to get this done. But how do you do it now when Parliament is so tied up with the issues of COVID? And I didn't realize what you had said just a few minutes ago, that it is on some of the the political parties' list. But during the COVID, what do you do? And then if you can't get anything done during COVID, how do you set it up so that when COVID ends, that it will become an issue that everybody addresses?
Yeah, during COVID itself, accountants have been really lobbying very hard to make the programs that the government has released for COVID as simple as possible, and to try and fix some of the flaws in their programs. So every time they release a program, it's flawed. There's things that don't make sense about it. And then accountants are, emailing the Department of Finance and liaisoning with CRA and trying to simplify just the COVID programs. So right now during COVID, there's no chance of the government spending any time or resources or energy looking at a massive simplification of the entire Canadian tax system. That's not going to happen. But once COVID is over, maybe it will be good timing if my book starts to spread. If every single person in this event can reach out to 10,000 of their closest family and friends and acquaintances and colleagues and tell them all to buy the book and read the book, and then everyone sends a copy to their member of parliament, maybe once COVID is over, it will be on, it could be an issue that I definitely CPA Canada is lobbying for it. And there's other groups that are lobbying as well. Canadian Taxpayers Federation, CFIB, Canadian Federation of Independent Business. There's a lot of groups that are lobbying on it, but Look, it's hard to affect this type of change unless it really becomes something that many people speak out about it. And I'll give you an example where actually the government very quickly made some changes. So in 2017, 3 years ago, the federal government legislated a whole new piece of legislation called TOSI, Tax on Split Income, TOSI. And this was a very, one of the most complicated pieces of tax legislation that was ever written. There was very little consultation with the tax world in Canada, the tax community. And the government very quickly had to backtrack. They released all the rules and proposed regulations in the summer when a lot of accountants are off on vacation. And during the fall, when accountants started reading legislation, there was a lot of shock. There were a lot of op-eds being written in the papers. There was a lot of law being done. And a lot of the rules that the government released in this piece of legislation, which affected a lot of small business owners, basically any Canadian with the private corporation, the government had to backtrack on 2 of the 3 proposals that they had. 2 of them they had to eliminate entirely. And it's beyond the scope of this conversation to get into those details. But and the one rule that they kept, they had to simplify it. And there was so much backlash against these rules from small business owners across the entire country that there was one member of parliament, a Liberal member of parliament, who voted against his caucus, which doesn't happen often. I think he was from Prince Edward Island. And in his riding in Prince Edward Island, there's a lot of small business owners that were hurt by this legislation. And they called him and emailed him incessantly, and he listened to the people in his riding, and he voted against the legislation of his own party. So when there's enough people speaking out and actually contacting their MPs over and over again and really making this an issue, they do listen. And in that example, in 2017, the government very quickly had to listen because everyone from the tax community, from across the spectrum, and people even from inside the Liberal Party and people from across the country were lobbying on this issue. And when enough people speak out against it, and you kind of create a movement, which is what I'm sort of going to start trying to do with Grumpy Accountant. Grumpyaccountant.ca is my website. I want to somehow start this movement of tax simplification and really make this an issue. And also, I feel that this can be an issue that really unites people from across the political spectrum, left, right, liberal, conservative, whatever. Will always disagree about certain issues like, okay, capital gains tax. Should we raise the capital gains rate, lower it? Should we tax people's principal residence? Should we have a wealth tax? There's all these kind of issues. Should we increase the GST? Should we increase income taxes? There's all these issues that people will always be disagreeing on based on where you fall on your own politics. But everyone should agree in principle, regardless. You can be the most communist, Marxist person, or you could be an extreme libertarian or anarchist, and anything in between. Everyone should agree, at least make it simple for millions of people, regardless of how much tax we're paying. Let's at least simplify it. So if we focus on that particular issue, simplifying the system, I think that's something that everyone could agree on, regardless of our politics. And you can get a lot more traction on that issue and get people from, like, what I envision is the government has when they do their comprehensive reform, it's done in a nonpartisan way where they have all the parties kind of working together on it, with accountants advising them and lawyers and people from across the country, business owners, small business owners, self-employed individuals, people from really all over the country, from every walk of life, have to get involved and create this comprehensive study and be a part of it.
Dan has his hand up. He was the next person.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, Neil. So my question is, what are your thoughts on universal basic income? And have your opinions changed with what's happened this year? Because I think CERB has been a kind of an experiment with universal basic income.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I have really mixed feelings about it. So the idea of universal, we have to be very careful with the terminology. I hate the idea of universal income meaning if someone's making $1 million a year, they don't need $2,000 a month from the government. So I would like to see more of what I would call a guaranteed minimum income as opposed to universal, because not everyone needs it. A lot of people don't need it, right? So, but a guaranteed basic income, what do you call it? Guaranteed income or guaranteed minimum income or guaranteed basic income or basic income or CERB or whatever the name is. There is a logic to it, but like the way I would envision it, I actually talk about this in the book, in The Grumpy Accountant. It's funny because in Canada, we already have it. If you're 65 years or older and your income is below a certain level, we have what's called GIS, Guaranteed Income Supplement. We have it. It's tax-free. It's paid to senior citizens 65 years or older based on their income. And on top of that, for senior citizens, we have OAS, Old Age Security. Now, that's not universal because as your income rises, your old age security goes down and then you lose it entirely if your income is too high. And it's also taxable, whereas guaranteed income supplement is not taxable. Now, in Canada, we also have Canada Child Benefits. So I actually looked at this when I wrote my book. Right now, the pre-COVID budget, so the COVID budget blows everything out of the water. So if we look at pre-COVID budget, the total federal government spending was about $300 billion pre-COVID in 1 year. And out of that $300 billion in spending, $80 billion was spent on transferring money directly to individual Canadians. So of that 80 billion, 5 billion was GST credits, 25 billion Canada Child Benefits, and $50 billion combined old age security and guaranteed income supplement. So $80 billion a year, and that's just the federal government. The provinces send out more on sales tax credits, and so $80 billion a year already transferred directly to individuals. Now, some of that, in my opinion, is being targeted to people who don't really need it. So for example, Canada Child Benefits, if your family income is below $200,000 a year, you will receive Canada Child Benefits. So you could have family income of, let's say, $150,000 a year, and every month, and you'll be paying, $40,000 of tax, okay, during the year. And every month, the government is sending you $100 into your bank account, $100. It's like, is that really necessary? Like, that's ridiculous. And it's really a gimmick. It's kind of just like a nice way to buy votes because people think, oh, look, the government's giving me money. It's optics, right? It makes for good politics. But in my opinion, it's not good policy. So I think, and even old age security, this might sound controversial, but some senior citizens, like if you're earning, if you show income of $100,000 a year, you're receiving old age security up until you hit $128,000 of income. Now it's taxable and it's clawed back, but we have to ask, like, do those people at that high level of income really need that? Like, honestly, because they're paying, they're still paying $30,000, $40,000 of tax, and then they're getting like $3,000 of old age security. So I think what we could do in Canada, and again, this would require a comprehensive, proper study, but if we're already willing to spend $80 billion a year, and what's 80 divided by 300? 8 times 5 is 400. That's a lot, right? I can't do the math in my head. I'm like, it's over 30. What is it? Over 20%, right? It's over 25%. 8 times 4, 320. Yeah, it's like 25%, right? Or over that. So we're already spending like that much of our budget on direct transfers to individuals. That could be our guaranteed minimum income. And in fact, some estimates of what a guaranteed minimum income in Canada would cost actually put it around that number of 80 billion. So I think if we just take that money that we're already spending and just retarget it, like I receive Canada Child Benefits of like $130 a month. It's ridiculous. I'm paying thousands of dollars of tax. I don't need that money, right? So all I need is a reduction in my income tax. So that's a whole other issue. But I think a guaranteed minimum income, I have mixed feelings about because it has to be done in such a way that when someone starts working and weans themselves off of the guaranteed minimum income, you don't want them to pay 100% effective marginal tax rate because they're losing out on the guaranteed income and then they earn income and have to pay tax on it. So what I talk about in my book, Milton Friedman, who is a famous economist, he talked about this. He calls it a negative income tax. So instead of calling it guaranteed minimum income, he calls it a negative income tax. It's basically the same idea, but it's structured in a way such that you have 3 tiers, okay? 1, 2, 3. So in tier 1 are people below a certain level of income. They get the guaranteed minimum income. Tier 2 are people in the middle tier where you're earning an income, you don't get guaranteed minimum income, but you don't pay any tax, okay? And then people above in a higher income, then you start paying tax. And the advantage of that kind of system is as you start earning an income and you lose out your guaranteed minimum income, you don't start to pay a lot of tax, because then that would disincentivize people from getting off of the guaranteed minimum income and going and earning their own income, which is obviously preferable, right? So I think there are ways of doing it there's a lot of like problems with it and flaws, and you have to work those out. So it's very complicated. It's not as simple as everyone's making it out to be, but it is an intriguing idea. But I don't think there's room in the Canadian budget to actually like spend more money than we already are directly transferring to individuals. We're already doing a lot of that, and we just need to do it better, I think, and that would actually go a long way. And I also think it shouldn't be done federally. I think it should be done provincially or even locally on a municipal level, because the cost of living is so different everywhere in the country. I mean, even I live in Thornhill, and even the cost of living, like the cost of my house compared to a cost in Forest Hill or in Toronto and other neighborhoods, there's a different cost of living everywhere you go in the country. So why would the federal government give the same amount of basic income to people regardless of where they live? So I think the guaranteed income should actually be administered on a provincial level, not federally. And I mean, I would actually say any direct transfer to individuals should be done on a provincial level, not the federal level, because then they could really target it better, and it could also be better adjusted to the people's actual cost of living. So those are some of my comments. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that was really good. Thank you.
I think there's a couple other questions.
There was one from Peter. Peter, did you want to come on?
I already did.
Okay, so you're covered. Aliza had one, and I got that privately. Did you want to join and ask? Or I can read it for you. It's how would you go about selecting an accountant? What would you look for?
Well, that's a good question. Don't come to me, okay? I'm too grumpy. I can't handle anymore. Okay, that's my first answer. Now, if you're a real estate agent, then you can come to me, because my colleague Stephen and I have started a new accounting firm for Ontario real estate agents. I think Stephen is in on here, Stephen Pitucci. There's Daniel Breeze, my buddy Dan is here, who just asked the question. You can go to him. But look, you have to find someone that works in a similar way to you. So if you're paperless and you're tech savvy and you don't like driving around, the city to meet with your accountant, a lot of accountants are paperless and will do everything virtually. Now, some people like the other way. Some people are old fashioned. They want to meet and sit down and talk to their accountant. So you want to find someone that will mesh well with you. I think the best way to find your accountant is ask around family and friends for someone who's good and will give a good referral. That's how you have to do it. You have to ask someone who knows somebody good. But I don't want to do it. Don't come to me. Rhonda asked me privately, how can you reach Parliament to read this book? Okay, Rhonda. So I actually emailed the Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland. I emailed her. I haven't heard back. I emailed Pierre Poilievre, who's the opposition finance critic. He actually wrote back to me and he said he'd be happy to receive the book, and I sent it to him, but I haven't heard back. I emailed both the NDP and the Green Party's finance critics. I haven't heard back. I emailed my own member of Parliament, Peter Kent. I haven't heard back. Who else? But the good news is I did actually get the book in the hands of the people who are involved with Aaron O'Toole, who's the new leader of the Conservative Party. And he actually has made this an issue. They just had a campaign in their party for the leader. They had a leadership election to elect the new leader of their party. And in that campaign, I followed it very closely. He actually talked about, he used the language that I really liked: simplify, eliminate deductions and credits, lower the rates, simplify, make it fair. So he kind of used that language, and his policy advisors, like whenever the next election might be, I know that some of the people on that team that are developing the policy for their party are going to read my book. So I think that's great. I hope, I think what I'm going to do is the Minister of Finance, I'm just going to send the book to her. And if it wasn't COVID, I actually had an idea to go with a video crew, drive to Ottawa and go to Parliament Hill and bring 330 or however many MPs there are, copies of the book, and hand a copy of my book physically to every single member of Parliament. And I would try and actually stage like a hunger strike, sitting on Parliament Hill, stage a protest until I can meet with the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in person and give them the book. So I had this plan, and then COVID happened, and I'm not like driving to Ottawa right now, but I do, that idea like is percolating in my head. Joan asked the question, who's my dear mother-in-law, the best mother-in-law in the world. In your grumpiness, is there an easier way to report capital gains or losses? So what do you mean exactly?
Hi, Neil.
Hi.
That's actually Larry's question.
Oh,
I think he means, hold on, he's coming. It's
Okay.
our question, Larry. You're on speaker now. So he wants to know what you mean by that.
Okay.
Right here, you can talk.
Hey Neil, how are you?
hi. Yeah, good. It's all good.
It's simple because your whole book is about making life simple, and I find capital gains and losses are very complicated. And I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if it's something that you think can make life more simple.
Right. Okay. So capital gains and losses is an issue in a certain way, I stayed away from in the book because the majority of Canadians aren't realizing capital gains and losses. It's a smaller amount of, it's subset of the population that has to deal with this. So I didn't really tackle that issue in my book, but it is complicated because you have to keep track of the cost of every single stock you buy. And then it's very complicated. Is there a way to make it simple? Well, obviously the simplest thing would be to eliminate the capital gains tax, but that will never happen. So, and I don't think it should. I think it makes sense. There should be a tax on capital gains. If we tax employment income, why wouldn't we tax every other type of income? There are some countries that don't have a capital gains tax. Canada didn't have a capital gains tax until 1971. So before 1971, there was no capital gains tax, and it started in 71. I don't know how you make it simpler, honestly. I mean, you have to track, like, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer to that because you have to keep track of the cost of the asset, and then obviously what you sold it for is easy enough. You know what you sold it for, but it's keeping track of the cost. But we have made it too complicated because with capital gains and losses, you can carry back a loss 3 years, you can carry it forward forever. So you have to keeping track of your losses every year. So yeah, it's complicated. I don't know if we'd be able to simplify that. When I talk about simplifying the system, I mean for people like employees who get a T4, small business owners, self-employed people, capital gains losses will always be complicated. I don't know, maybe do you have any ideas, or does anyone else have any ideas they want to chime in?
Probably through technology. That's probably the only way to make it simpler if we keep track of everything through some sort of electronic method.
It's funny. So, okay, it's funny you mentioned that. The CRA now, if you look at your CRA My Account, all your tax slips show up there, your T slips, your T4s, T3s, T5s. If you receive CPP, OAS, all those slips are right on the CRA website. I tell all my clients now, don't send me your tax slips. I don't need them. I get them right from the CRA. But what they also show up now on CRA is your capital gains. it's called a T5008. So your bank, whenever you have a capital gain, if you sell a stock or you sell anything, your bank automatically will send you a T5008 at the end of the year, and it shows up on CRA, but it doesn't show the cost base a lot of the time. So it shows what you sold it for, doesn't show the cost. So you still have to keep track of the cost by yourself. But I think the CRA is trying to like use technology in a much better way. So I think you're right, Dan. And actually, to the credit of the CRA, I can't believe I'm saying this, but their system, like represent a client and my account, my business account, it's actually not horrible. It's actually really good. There are so many things we can do now online, directly on the CRA website, that you might not have to call CRA anymore. So actually, they've improved a lot with technology. So maybe capital gains losses with technology, they might be able to improve more and make it easier for people. Suzanne asked a question. Given that so many people have started working from home, how do you counsel clients to make the most of their tax returns? How has it affected the work of accountants? When will you be campaigning for the job of finance minister? It's my dream job is to be the minister of finance. I second that question. It's my dream job. I would love doing it, but I'm too sensitive to go into politics. Politics is so hard, and I'm a very sensitive guy. And I would like cry on the first day when everyone starts criticizing me for like cutting the federal government's budget in half and abolishing like half of income tax. And then all these op-eds, all newspapers criticize me as the most horrible person in the world. I would cry myself to sleep. So I don't know. I think I could try to like put these ideas out there, and maybe like people who are in power will listen to these ideas, but I don't know if I could do it myself. Working from home. So the government issued a new home office deduction for people who don't want to go to the trouble of calculating what your home office expense should actually be. You can claim a standard $400 deduction for the year, based like multiplied by the number of days you're working from home. So that's a new thing for COVID. And you don't need, this is new also, you don't need a T2200 form from your employer. So usually if you want to claim working from home expenses, if you're an employee, your employer has to give you a form called T2200. It's another useless, bureaucratic, ridiculous form that just causes a lot of grumpiness and frustration and shouldn't really be necessary. So for COVID, the government actually eliminated this form for people because there's literally, I think I actually looked up the statistics, like approximately 5 million Canadians working from home that used to not work from home, which would mean employers across the country would have to prepare 5 million T2200 forms, and many of these employers would never have prepared these forms before. So the government's actually making it easier during COVID to claim the home office expense, which is great. So what I'm telling people is either you can claim that standard deduction, or if you think you're entitled to more, then you can claim more, but then you're gonna have to keep all the receipts and do all the calculations and risk a CRA audit. So it's a bit of a trade-off. How has it affected the work of accountants? Honestly, like this whole COVID thing has really made the lives of accountants absolutely a complete mess the past year, because all these new programs are completely brand new, CERB and SEBA and all of them, and they're very complicated. And accountants are completely totally busy all the time receiving questions from their clients about all these programs. Are they eligible? Can you help me calculate this, calculate that? I got a letter from Syria about this. I don't know if I'm eligible for that. Maybe I'm eligible for this. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. I thought I was. Now I am. Now I'm not. And it's like been an absolute nightmare, honestly. And the next tax season coming up in the next few months, as people file their 2020 tax returns, and it will also be a nightmare because people aren't going to be ready for their tax bills on their CERB. So it's been a nightmare for accountants, and it's a problem. It's a big problem. And actually the first article I had, I'm sure a lot of you saw in the Financial Post, the National Post, the Financial Post comment page, the very first article that I wrote for them was in March, right before CERB was implemented. Before they implemented CERB, the government said that they would create 2 different programs. And I wrote an email to my email list, which has all of my clients and family and friends, basically a rant complaining about the government's response because it was just too complicated. And like, why did they have to create two different programs? Why not just create one? Or why not just use the EI system and just put people on EI who otherwise wouldn't be eligible? Like that would maybe make things a bit simpler. And I wrote this whole long rant, and somebody replied to my email and said, why don't you send this to the Financial Post? They might I think they would really like this. I said, no, there's no way they're going to publish my article. Are you crazy? But she sent me the emails of the editors and who to send it to, and they ran with it. And that was a lot of fun writing that article. But a week later, the government announced that instead of creating two programs, they would create one program, and they called it SERB. So I feel like they listened to my op-ed, which was calling for one program instead of two, just to make it easier for people. Now, of course, SERB ended. And to replace SERB, we have three programs now. You have Canada Response Benefit, you have Canada CRS, Canada Sickness Response Benefit, and Canada Caregiving Response Benefit. So they created three new programs to replace SERB because they want to target it better, because they don't want to send money to people who don't need it. So I kind of understand why they did that, but it's quite complicated. So people are still asking these questions. Leo Turkel. Doesn't it go against a politician's DNA to simplify and not be able to give favors to special interest groups and individuals? Yes, of course it goes against their DNA, but it's for the good of the country that every single tax deduction and tax credit in the system is what's causing my grumpiness. It's what's causing people that they can't file their own tax returns. So what I'm saying is, if we eliminate and abolish every single deduction and credit in the tax system at once, at the same time, nobody can complain. Because if we do it piecemeal, if we say next year, we're eliminating the childcare deduction, are you crazy? Every parent in the country would rebel. They would march on Parliament Hill. And if the next year, okay, we're going to eliminate medical expenses, are you crazy? Nobody would allow that. But if we say we're going to eliminate every single credit and deduction at once, and then we're going to lower the tax rates, and everyone will be better off, and forget about pandering to special interest groups and voters. But absolutely, it goes against their DNA. This is a tough sell for politicians. Politicians love tax credits and deductions because they could target their favorite group of voters. And both major political parties are guilty of this. In the Harper conservative years, we had the child fitness tax credit, the child arts tax credit, the public transit tax credit. We had all these tax credits, which like, okay, I like the idea of lowering people's tax bills, but not through these silly tax credits, which just cause people have to keep their receipts for 6 years. And I remember clients, when we had these tax credits, the CRA would send letters to clients, to taxpayers, asking them for copies of their kids' soccer programs. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's so unnecessary. If you want to lower the people's tax bills, just lower the tax rate. And now the current Liberal government, they eliminated all the Harper credits and they put in their own tax credits. So we actually have a tax credit now for teachers to claim school supplies. Okay, so if teachers have to pay out of pocket for supplies for the classroom, well, now they can claim a tax credit for that. And I had a teacher, a client, get audited for her school supplies that she claimed. She had to send in 70 receipts, which totaled $1,000. Now, keep in mind, the credit's only worth $150, 15% of $1,000. So she had to send in 70 receipts, and she had to provide a letter from her principal at the school saying she was obligated to incur these expenses and the school did not reimburse her. You know what happened? The school refused to provide the letter for her because they didn't want to be liable for anything. So here we had the CRA, so one arm of the government, the CRA, asking for a letter from the school, and the school in the public school system, they're afraid of liability for $150 tax refund. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing. I spent hours on this. It's insane. So I think politicians, they love these credits and deductions. But I would argue that like the benefit, if you do a cost benefit analysis of every single credit and deduction, in my opinion, it's not worth it. Eliminate it, get rid of it. And the politicians will have less ability to pander to special interest groups, which is a good thing. That's a good thing for our country. So, but you're right, it goes against their DNA, and it's definitely a tough sell. I think there were more questions, so I'm just gonna, Okay, what else? Jonathan Ostro asked a question, but I can't really see it. Jonathan, do you want to come on and ask your question?
No, I was just making a joke that you tried to send it to the block, but they wanted your book in French.
The block.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, Neil, I'll message you tomorrow. I can give you contact details for the Minister of Finance's liaison to CRA. You can get at them there, and also senior policy advisor for the Minister of Finance.
Oh, I love that.
You're
Awesome.
right. Like I spent the last summer screaming at these guys because I had so many issues with CRA.
Yeah.
The only people I talk to at work now are CRA agents and Ministry of Finance. So
yeah, look, I'm on the phone with CRA every day. But to their credit, actually, if you call at the right time, like you can get through pretty quickly. I was trying to call TD Direct Investing for an issue I was having. I was on the phone for 2 hours and on hold for 2 hours, and then they hung up on me. It was worse. The TD was offering worse service than the CRA. I was shocked, and I'm complaining to TD about it. But yeah, Jonathan, I understand your frustration. Unity Wagner, Perry, right? Who's Unity? Who's Perry? Do you want to come on and ask your question?
Hi, sorry, I'm just running back and forth from the nursery, putting my kids to sleep. But yeah, so you and I have spoken a lot about financial literacy. I'm Perry, by the way, and Unity. Unity is my Hebrew name. Perry is my legal name, just to answer your earlier question.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
You did know that. We speak about it like every time we talk, but that's
I didn't know
that. But anyhow, you and I have spoken a lot about how it's really important for high schoolers and university age students to really understand more about financial literacy. And you jokingly said, you know, that my book should really be a part of their curriculum. And the more I read your book, I know you said it laughingly, but I actually really agree. I think it would be beneficial to talk not just to the Minister of Finance, but also to the Minister of Education, because I know in BC, they actually were the first to integrate financial literacy into their education. And Ontario has followed suit, and it's now part of grade 10 curriculum. So if you're hoping to broadcast your message widely, that might be a good place to start. And I mean, I'm a mortgage agent, so I'm more like into disseminating and spreading financial literacy across the board, but I think most people could recognize how valuable and practical that tool would be. And your book is a great way to articulate that to high schoolers because it's easy to read and will help them understand very difficult concepts in a less complex way.
Yeah, financial literacy should be taught in schools. I'm really happy that the Ontario government recently added it into the curriculum. Are you saying that they only added it in grade 10? Or did they add it in earlier years as well?
As far as I'm aware, in Ontario, it's now in the grade 10 curriculum, but the grades, like it's very recent. So I'm actually doing some financial literacy seminars for high schools in the area, or I'm starting to, they haven't happened yet, for grade 12, because they've missed out on that curriculum.
Yeah.
So
I think financial literacy should be taught starting in kindergarten, and every kid in the entire country should be learning this. Now, parents obviously, look, parents can't outsource everything to the schools, but a lot of parents are not equipped to teach their children about financial literacy. So the schools have to teach it. And part of that should be tax and the Canadian tax system, an intro to tax. People graduate from high school, they start college or university, they have no idea that they can claim tuition credits. And people have no idea that when you turn 19 years old, if you file a tax return, even if you have zero income, you automatically get GST credits, even with zero income, as soon as you turn 19. And that's like a few $100s plus the province. So you could file a tax return, receive like $500 tax-free right there. And then you have to claim your tuition credits every year in college and university. So yeah, I mean, my book, I think it's too political, like that for any provincial government to add it as like required reading in a high school curriculum. But I think they definitely should be, as part of financial literacy in schools, should be teaching an intro to how our tax system works, just basic things like what is a T4 slip? what is CPP-EI and income tax that's deducted from your pay? Like people, they start their first job, they don't know this. And how do you file a tax return? How do you get your T2202 slip for your tuition? So all these basic things, it should be taught in school, absolutely. I actually reached out to, I went to York University, Schulich School of Business. And back like when I was, I'm 35 now. So how many years ago? Like I graduated 2008, so 12 years ago. But I actually emailed when I came out with the book. I went through I went on the York website and I looked up every single professor in the business school that teaches accounting or tax or finance. And I emailed every single one of them, offering them a free copy of the book. And telling them I'm a graduate of Schulich and I wrote this book. And a few of them reached out to me and they were very happy. And one professor, Professor Milevsky, who teaches personal finance, he actually invited me to speak to his class, both undergrad BBA students and his MBA students that he teaches. And we recorded a 30-minute Zoom call where he interviewed me about my book. And he was very pleased with the book in terms of that it is a really good introduction and refresher to the tax system. So look, that was just one professor in one university, but I do have I have a gigantic list of people and other organizations that I'm reaching out to, and colleges and universities across the country is part of my plan. There was a book released recently, or a few years, maybe in 2014, I think. It was called Wealthing Like Rabbits. It was written by Robert Brown, and it's a great book about personal finance. And he went to, this is pre-COVID, he actually went in person to every college and universities across the country and spoke. And instead of them paying him fees to speak, he sold them books. He gave them 100 books, 200 books that they gave out to the students. And that's a great way. Like I'm hoping that I could do something like that, because I think absolutely like every college and university student should read this book, and because it serves as a great introduction to the tax system. So that's a really good question.
There was, sorry, continue.
Just one more thought and then I'll pass on, but you might want to reach out also to colleges that are doing virtual seminars.
Right.
That have, even colleges that are not necessarily in Canada, but have big Canadian student bases. So
right.
Such as Yeshiva University, Columbia, NYU, etc. Like
in New York.
You might want to reach out to them as well. Anyways,
good idea. Thank you.
There was one question about having reached out to the traditional media, and I know that that's like a plan for the future to do some public relations work. Mm-hmm. But before that, I know how important it is, and how, you know, that's why having people come on here and you have some family and some friends, and that like initial organic growth is so important in the early stages. Having, you know, the book resonate with you, and it's so helpful, you know, as we've seen tonight, like you're full of knowledge and full of expert advice, and that can really help people. And so having you share that with people, you know, and then you all can pass that on to others and it can help them and so forth. That initial organic growth is, I think, a great way to start a community and a base. And with that being said, I'm going to share the link to the book on Amazon for those of you who have purchased it or have not yet. And what's really important to let people know that you love it. The book has been helpful to you. Neil's certainly an expert. If you can post a review, that would be so helpful. And there will be a recording of tonight's call, and we'll share that as well. But I wanted to get to the trivia question. And that was, so from the reading that Neil read before, does anyone remember what poster, and you can type this in the chat, what poster he references, and where the poster's from, what the poster is? And if you know the answer, yes. So we have a winner, and we have a lot of people who paid attention. So Ilan is the winner. So, and what does he win?
Who won?
Ilan.
Oh, Elon wins. Wow. Well, I think he already has a copy of the book, but I can give him another one if he wants.
A signed copy?
Yeah.
I'll take an inscription.
Okay.
But if
signed,
you're giving away a book, you can give it to second place.
I'm gonna give a signed, a really good inscription. You're gonna get the best inscription that anyone's ever gotten.
You better use both covers.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you want to let them know, I said where to post your reviews. So please go do that if you have some time. You let them know where to buy the book and where, like, what are you up to next?
What am I up to next? Well, I'm gonna keep marketing the book. I have other ideas for other books I want to write, but I don't have time right now. But like, there are other books I want to write. I want to write a novel, which I can't give away the idea. It's sort of a dystopian kind of future novel, but it relates to these issues of like tax and fiscal policy. I also want to write a children's book because my 2-year-old, we have a 2-year-old at home, and she's become very defiant since she turned 2. And I realized a children's book with the title Defiance, I think would be a big hit. So like, I have that idea, but I have other ideas, like, and I want to write a sequel to The Grumpy Accountant, which will kind of be like an uncensored, very controversial book, unlike this book, which I don't think is too controversial. So I have these other ideas, but we'll see what happens. Right now, the focus is on marketing The Grumpy Accountant, spreading the word, trying to sell enough books just to like break even, honestly, and hopefully more. But really, like, I hope that the ideas in the book actually start to influence government policy, and really kind of start to make a splash, and that people take it seriously. Like, yes, our tax system is too complicated. We can make it simpler. It's not unrealistic. Other countries have done it. And why are we so far behind? And so really, like, that's the focus right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
I'm happy to stick around because if there's like more questions, I don't know if we missed any of the questions, but someone messaged me privately, what are your thoughts on a flat tax for income? So whether you make $30,000 or $30 billion, the first 13,000 is tax free and the rest is taxed at the same percentage. So that's a great question. That would obviously be the simplest way to have a tax system, like a basic exemption with one flat rate. The trade-off between simplicity and fairness is like, it's a constant battle that policymakers have to deal with. Do you want a simple tax system or a fair tax system that helps people? Like, what is the goal of a tax system? Is it to just simply collect revenue, or is it beyond that? Is it to accomplish, social policy objectives, to redistribute income? So if your goal is simply to collect revenue, I think you could have basically a flat tax rate, and I would have a much higher basic exemption. So I would have a basic exemption of like at least $50,000, not $13,000. And that would actually cover the bottom 65% of income earners. And then everyone else maybe could pay one flat rate of tax on any income above 50,000, or you could have like two brackets. So you have 0 to 50,000, there's no tax. And maybe 50,000 to like 300 or 400,000 is one flat rate. And then anything above 400,000 or maybe anything above 500,000 is at a higher rate. But in general, like right now in our tax system, if you go to if you Google, 2020 tax calculator or 2020 tax brackets, and you look at the combined federal Ontario tax brackets for 2020, there's like over 10 different tax brackets. And it's ridiculous. We don't need that many brackets. I think you could definitely bring it down to 3. I don't think Canadians would go for a flat tax. The idea that whether you make 30,000 or 30 billion, you pay the same rate. I don't think Canadians like that idea for the most part, but that would definitely make it a lot simpler. But I think you could have like some sort of hybrid compromise position where you have a higher basic exemption, and then you have 2 brackets, one like kind of middle normal income, and then like a higher rate on the highest bracket. It's interesting that in Ontario, right now in Canada, 7 out of 10 provinces have a top marginal tax rate of over 50%. And in Ontario, that kicks in at 220 or about 214,000 of income. Now, 10 years ago, the top tax rate in Ontario was about 46%, kicking in at over 400,000 of income. But over the past 10 years, both the federal government and the provincial government did not coordinate with each other. They raised rates, they both raised rates, and they both lowered that threshold of where the highest rate applies. So, like, in my opinion, 220,000 is really not the same as 400,000, especially because if that's an individual earning 220,000, but they're supporting a family of 4 or whatever, and you're living in the GTA where the cost of living has increased so much in the past 10, 20 years, I think the tax rates have to be updated. The very great Thomas Mulcair, I love Tom Mulcair. He was the former leader of the NDP. He said, former leader of the NDP said tax rates above 50% are not taxation, it's confiscation. So that's interesting that the former NDP leader said that. But I don't think Canadians would go for a flat tax completely, but we do need to flatten it in terms of, we don't need 10 tax brackets. I mean, I think you could have 3 or 4 and that would do the trick. Are there any other questions we missed? I'm just trying to scroll down here. I don't like this chat thing. It's very traditional media. Yeah, we're trying that. John McAfee, help your cause. CRATD always hang up on me too. Okay. Yeah, that's not surprising. Did I miss any other questions? Amazon, Is the bonus question, on which 90s sitcom are the character names based? Shira Schwartz. That's a good question. I think everyone knows. As you can see, Kramer and George.
And Larry David is also here.
Yeah, who is Larry David who's in this chat? I'm honored that Larry David would come.
He needs to reveal himself.
I can't, it's so small. I have to double click. I can't see who it is. How do I put him on the big screen? I don't know how to do it. Who is it?
I'm gonna ask him to unmute.
He just took his video off. Okay. But my very wonderful wife has allowed me to put Kramer and George up in our home office / library. So I think you know which sitcom it's based on. But for legal purposes, I've been advised to remind everyone that my book is not based on any sitcom at all. So don't tell Castle Rock that I put Seinfeld references throughout my book. Although if I got sued by Castle Rock, it would be amazing publicity. So maybe I should get sued by that. Is this the real Larry David? Is this one of the US federal changes? Larry David, what are you referring to?
I think
Didn't Trump reduce the amount of tax brackets?
I'm not so up to date on like US tax, what's going on there. I do know that they raised the basic exemption, like, and they increased the child amount, like the child credit. I don't know if they decreased like the actual amount of tax brackets they have. And also in the States, like every state has different rates and brackets. So I don't know. I can't comment on the US because I just have no idea. The Canadian tax system is complicated enough. One of my friends said the only tax reform that would be of any real value is for the wealthy to pay more tax. So that's interesting. Okay. I looked up on Statistics Canada. So this is a question basically, do the rich pay their fair share of tax in Canada? So do the rich pay their fair share? I looked up on Statistics Canada. You can go to Statistics Canada and you could see the distribution of like the top 0.01%, the top 0.1%, the top 1%, the top 10% of these income earners in the country, and the share of their income and the share of tax that they pay. And according to Statistics Canada, these income groups, like, so for example, the top 1% of Canadians, I forget the actual figures, but what I remember was they're basically like based on their share of income. So for example, the top 1% of income earners in Canada earn 10% of the income, let's say, but they're paying 17% of all the income taxes. So those aren't the exact numbers. I forget what they are, but that's kind of like how it turned out. So if you take those numbers, really what the conclusion is actually that they actually are paying, in a sense, more than their fair share. But there, and it doesn't even include the sales tax they pay every time they buy something, and it doesn't include the property tax they pay on the real estate that they own. And then these people usually own real estate and pay. So that's just income tax, not sales tax, property tax. So in my opinion, like the idea that the wealthy need to pay more in the US, that might be a different answer because they have a whole different system and a different situation there. But in Canada, our system actually is much more progressive and much more generous in terms of like the distributions, like what I was talking about before, Canada Child Benefits, Old Age Security, GST credits, Guaranteed Income Supplement. The Canadian tax system is very, very generous. And in like my opinion is that in Canada, there's no room to increase taxation at all. I think we're at the top, like that's it. I don't think there's any room to increase tax for anyone in Canada. But the tax reform that I focus on in my book is not about this issue. It's not about should we pay less tax or more tax. It's about the nature of how we file our tax returns has to be more simple, regardless of how much tax we're actually paying. Now, someone asked, can we discuss a bit more of how Canada would pay the short-term costs of the review? How is that feasible? I think no. So we could do, my idea is actually could be revenue neutral to the government. That's what I propose in the book. Basically, I calculated that you can find these statistics on the federal government's website and Statistics Canada. All the tax deductions and credits in the system cost the government money because every deduction and credit you claim lowers your tax bill, right? So I calculated like all these deductions and credits are costing the federal government like $130 billion a year. So we lower our tax bills by that much money. If we eliminated and abolished every single tax deduction and tax credit, that would save us that would cost us taxpayers $130 billion, which obviously we don't want to pay $130 billion more in tax. So we lower the tax rates to make up the difference. And that's how we can then raise the basic exemption. And we would lower the tax rates starting at the lowest brackets. So the lowest income earning people would benefit more from like an increase in that basic exemption. The basic exemption is the amount of the amount of income that everyone can earn without paying any tax. So it could be feasible because this type of review could be done in a way that's revenue neutral, meaning the government doesn't have to lose or gain more money here, and taxpayers overall don't have to lose or gain more money here. It could be done in a way that's neutral. What's your view on having closely held corporations having the option to be taxed personally like partnerships? Okay, Max, this is an excellent question. I actually write about this in my book. Small business owners who operate through a corporation have an extremely complicated, burdensome, frustrating horror show nightmare of a tax system to comply with. So what I propose in my book is that if you're a business owner and you own your own corporation, so it's just you have your own consulting business or whatever type of business is, people like to incorporate their business because for legal liability purposes, right? But then when you incorporate in Canada, from a tax perspective, you now have to file a corporate tax return in addition to your personal tax return. And if you take money out of the corporation, you have to pay personal tax on your salary or dividend you take out. So a business owner has to file a corporate tax return, a personal tax return, usually a GST, HST return, and a T4 or T5 for their salary. So you're filing 4 tax returns now, and you have to make all these different tax payments to CRA. So it's way too complicated. So what I would like to see, just like you said, S Corps in the United States, they have something called an S Corp, which basically taxes the income. It just goes onto your personal tax return. So it makes it simpler, like in terms of the tax filings. I would love to see that in Canada, some type of basically what we do for self-employed people. If you're self-employed, you file what's called a T2125 on your personal tax return. You show the income, you show the expenses, and it's just one tax filing. You still have to file an HST return, but that HST return can be combined onto the personal tax return. So I definitely feel like there's 5 chapters in my book. Almost 25% of my book is about this issue, about small business owners, self-employed people. And there's millions of Canadians that are self-employed that have to go through this. So it's a great question. I talk about this in the book, and I would love to see more simplicity. But I should clarify, we don't really have double taxation because in the corporation, when you pay out a salary to yourself, remember, that's a deductible expense in the corporation, right? So you're not really incurring double taxation when you incorporate. And even if you pay yourself a dividend, same thing. The tax system in Canada has what's called integration, where it doesn't make a difference whether you pay salary or dividend, and the corporate and personal income, basically, like whether you're in the income through a corporation or personally, should in the like after taking into account everything, it's the same amount of tax that you would pay in either scenario. So we don't really have the double taxation problem, although you sort of maybe you have it with like dividend income, but yeah, you sort of have it with dividend income sometimes. But again, like they'll never fix that issue because it would cause people to pay less tax, and the government doesn't want to do that. Tabitha wrote, the top earners don't earn income until the last half of the third quarter. What does that mean? Confused.
Oh, I was just responding when we were discussing about top income earners, how much tax they pay. That's the information that was given to me, that they actually don't start earning money until
I see, because they're paying so much tax.
Yeah, they're not in the green until
right. Because if you're paying a 50, right. Yeah. So let's say your income is $500,000, you're paying $250,000 of tax personally, right? So yeah, the first half of the year you're working for the government. Yeah, it's a problem. Jacob wrote, is it correct that if you only have dividends income up to 60,000 a year, you don't pay income tax at all? Yeah, I don't know if it's as high as 60. I think it's more like 40, 50. I think once you hit 60, you start to pay a tiny bit of income tax, like very small. But you're right. It's a strategy that doesn't get talked about enough. This works for people if you have zero other income. Let's say you have no income and the only income you have is dividend income. You can earn non-eligible dividends, like if it's from a private corporation, about 35, almost 40,000, and you won't pay any income tax. And then if you earn eligible dividends, yeah, it's about, I don't know if it's as high as 60. I think it's more like 50-ish, something around there. But even at 60 or even at 70, I just did this calculation for a client recently. Even at 80,000 of just dividend income, you only pay like $2,000 or $3,000 of tax. The idea is that the corporation already paid tax on that income, and that's why you personally don't have to pay it. So that's kind of the idea there. I think that's all the questions. I want to just thank everybody for coming. So a lot of people left already, but I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of work marketing this book, so I appreciate everything, all the help that everyone's been giving. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time. Thank you, Tabitha, for organizing this. I appreciate it. And please, everyone, I implore you, buy a copy of the book, send it to your member of parliament, and buy 100 copies of the book and give them as gifts to everyone. And then send an email to like 500,000 of your closest family and friends and tell them about the book as well. I really appreciate it.
That's all. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Be well.
Thanks, Neil.
And happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you. Come again.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Neil. Great job.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oops.
It's just leaving. Live stream. Stop the recording.